He thought she was just another homeless girl, until he saw her teaching his disabled son to walk, and discovered a secret that shattered everything he thought he knew. It was a crisp autumn morning in New York City, the kind where the leaves crunched underfoot and even the air felt expensive. Grayson Wolfe, 40, billionaire real estate mogul and single father, walked out of his penthouse building and headed toward Central Park with his 3-year-old son, Leo, bundled in a soft gray coat. Leo had been born with underdeveloped muscles in his legs. Despite every top therapist and every piece of cutting-edge equipment money could buy, he still couldn't take more than 2 steps without collapsing. But Grayson never gave up. Leo gripped his father's hand as they strolled through the quiet path toward the fountain, their daily routine. Then, suddenly, Grayson froze. There, near the edge of the fountain, was a young woman in worn clothes, sitting cross-legged on the stone. Her coat was too big, her boots mismatched, and beside her sat a rolled-up blanket and a torn canvas bag. She was clearly homeless. But what stopped Grayson wasn't her appearance. It was Leo. His son let go of his hand and walked. 3, 4, 5 steps toward her. The woman turned, eyes wide with surprise, and then smiled brightly. "There you go, little warrior," she said gently. "Just like we practiced." Grayson's heart pounded. Practiced? He rushed forward, scooping Leo up just before he stumbled. "What are you doing?" he asked, sharper than he meant to. The girl stood quickly, hands raised. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean—" "Do you know my son?" She hesitated. I see him here sometimes. You're always on the phone. He wanders to the fountain. I just kept him company, that's all." Grayson narrowed his eyes. "You taught him to walk." She nodded slowly, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "Only a few steps. He was scared to fall, so I let him fall, and then he stopped being scared." Grayson stared at her, words failing. Who was this girl, and how had she done with nothing what entire teams of specialists couldn't? He glanced down at Leo, who was grinning and reaching for her again. Something about her was pulling at him. Familiar, wrong and right at the same time, and he had no idea. That this wasn't the first time she'd saved his son. Grayson didn't leave. He sat on the park bench, watching the girl carefully. Leo stayed close to her, giggling as she helped him balance on a pile of leaves. She wasn't nervous anymore, just gentle, completely focused on Leo like he was her own. Grayson cleared his throat. "What's your name?" She hesitated, then replied softly. "Ava." "How old are you?" 21. He studied her again. She looked younger than that, or maybe just worn, like life had aged her too soon. "Where are your parents?" "Gone." Simple answer. No drama, no pity. "Where do you stay?" She looked at the rolled-up blanket and then back at him. "Around." It hit him harder than it should have. "You're homeless, but you've been helping my son." She shrugged. "I don't need a home to care about someone." The words punched through his chest. Because for all his money, power, and success, he hadn't been able to teach Leo to believe in himself. But this girl had. Later that evening, Grayson sat in his home office, staring at the baby monitor showing Leo fast asleep. He couldn't shake her voice, her face. There was something too familiar. He pulled out an old photo album from the drawer, one labeled NICU, Leo's First Days. And that's when his fingers stopped flipping. There, in a photo he barely remembered taking, was a teenage girl standing behind Leo's incubator. Same eyes, same faint scar on her chin. A hospital volunteer. Avenue Grayson's pulse spiked. She had been there from the beginning. But why? What was this thread tying her to his son? It wasn't just kindness. It wasn't coincidence. And something deep inside him whispered, "You haven't uncovered even half of it yet." The next morning, Grayson waited near the fountain before sunrise, bundled in a dark coat, coffee in hand, Leo beside him in his stroller. Ava arrived, her eyes surprised but not frightened. "You're early," she said with a soft smile. "So are you," he replied, then paused. "We need to talk." She nodded slowly, like she knew this was coming. They sat on the same bench as yesterday, Leo playing quietly with leaves between them. Grayson pulled out the photo, the NICU picture. Her face paled. "I knew I recognized you," he said. "You weren't just some volunteer. Why were you really there, Ava?" She looked down at her frayed gloves, silent for a long moment. Then, "Because I knew who he was." Grayson stiffened. "What do you mean?" She took a shaky breath. "I was 17, one of the interns doing hospital hours for my medical prep course. I wasn't supposed to be near the NICU, but I heard the nurses talking. They said there was a newborn with a weak heart, born prematurely to a billionaire's wife. Everyone was watching, waiting to see if the baby would make it." She looked up at him, eyes glistening. That baby was Leo. Grayson said nothing, heart thudding. "I wasn't just watching from behind the glass," she continued. "I snuck in. I held his hand through the incubator holes when the machines beeped too loud. I whispered to him every day before and after school, even when no one else thought he could hear. And then—" She stopped. "Then what?" Grayson pressed, voice cracking. Ava's voice dropped to a whisper. "Your wife, Emily. She spoke to me once. She asked my name. She said thank you. She told me, if anything ever happened to her, to never let Leo feel alone." Grayson's breath caught in his throat. "Emily died 6 days later." Ava nodded. "I remember. You were just a child. Why would you carry that?" "Because I meant it," she said. "I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But I never stopped looking for him." Grayson stared at her, emotion swelling like a tidal wave. "You found him again, and you never told me." Ava wiped a tear. "You were always surrounded by security, money, cameras. I didn't belong. I just waited for the day fate would let me close enough to help." Grayson leaned back, stunned. All this time he thought he had carried Leo alone, but he hadn't. There had been a girl in the shadows, whispering strength into his son before he could even breathe on his own. And now? She wasn't in the shadows anymore. Days turned into weeks, and Ava became a permanent part of Leo's world. She never asked for anything. No money, no favors. She simply showed up every morning, sat by Leo as he practiced his steps, and reminded him gently that falling didn't mean failing. Grayson watched them every day from the balcony above the garden, heart full, mind spinning. He'd spent years trying to build a world so perfect for Leo that he forgot love doesn't always come from architects and therapists. Sometimes it comes in the form of a girl with torn gloves and an unmatched soul. One rainy evening, as Ava prepared to leave after dinner, Grayson stopped her at the door. "You don't have to keep going back out there?" She smiled. "I'm used to it. That's not the point." He stepped closer. "Ava, I have everything, but I don't have the person who showed up for my son when no one else did. I don't have the girl who held his hand before I even knew how to be a father." She swallowed hard. "Why are you saying this?" "Because I want you here. Not as a guest, not as a helper." He took her hands. "As family." Tears filled her eyes. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." 3 months later, Ava moved in. Not as a nanny, not as a stranger, but as someone who had always been meant to stay. She helped Leo walk without fear. She brought laughter back into the halls of a home that had once echoed with silence. And Grayson? He didn't just find someone who healed his son. He found the missing piece of a life he thought he'd built alone. Love didn't arrive in a limousine. It didn't wear a designer label. It walked barefoot across pavement, waited quietly by a fountain, and turned a lonely billionaire and his fragile little boy into a family that finally felt whole.